Senator Dalphond.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Moi aussi, je vais prendre la parole sur S.
I will all rise today on S-222, and I did not consult Senator Carignan before speaking. Unlike him, I will not remark on the substance of the bill, whether 17, 16, or 15 years old would be the right voting age.
Not to share my opinion or not on whether or not this is good legislation, what has been proposed, but rather to express concerns about the content of such a bill being introduced by a non-elected member of Parliament. In 2024, I rose to speak on this exact issue at debate on Bill S-201, a former iteration of this bill before us today. I ask this chamber today, as I did then, whether the Senate, as an unelected chamber, is the appropriate forum for this political question. Today, I still answer in the negative. Je débuterai d'abord par rappeler.
I'll begin by reminding you of the Senate's role under the Constitution as summarized by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2014 in the reference regarding Senate reform, quoting paragraphs 55, 56, and 57. Beats up to the, and unfortunately the interpreter does not have the, as the court wrote in its reference, it is obvious that we want to create a completely independent organization that could view or study House of Commons measures with impartiality. The drafters removed the Senate from the election process in which members of the House of Commons take part to ensure that senators are not in the political arena that is always subject to the imperatives of short-term political objectives. At the same time, the decision to entrust the executive with the task of appointing senators was also intended to ensure that the Senate would become a complementary legislative body rather than an eternal rival to the House of Commons in the legislative process. Appointed senators would not have a mandate to represent the people. They would not be required to meet the expectations arising from a popular election and thus would not enjoy the legitimacy that such an election confers. Thus, they would confine themselves to their role as members of a body whose primary function is to review legislation rather than to be the equal of the House of Commons. As John A. MacDonald explained during parliamentary debates on Confederation, there would be greater dangers of conflict between the two houses if the constitution of the Legislative Council, instead of being left in the hands of the Crown, were to be placed in those of the people, end quote. A Senate whose members are appointed would have the role of, and I quote MacDonald once again, moderating and calmly considering the legislation of the Assembly and preventing the passage of any bill, ill-timed or pernicious bill passed by the latter without ever daring to oppose the considered and defined wishes of the people. Paragraph 59, the fact that senators are appointed, together with the correct premise arising therefrom that their appointment would prevent the Senate from overstepping its role as a complementary legislative body, shapes the architecture of the Constitution Act 1867. Still quoting the Supreme Court, for these reasons, the drafters of the Act, that is, the Constitution of 1867, did not deem it necessary to specify in writing how the relationship between the powers of the Senate and those of the House of Commons would be structured, nor the means of resolving a deadlock between the two chambers. Indeed, the Constitution Act 1867 confers at first glance legislative authority over the Senate as great as that of the House of Commons, with the exception of the rule that bills relating to taxation and the appropriation of funds must be introduced by the House of Commons. As Professor Smith aptly summarizes, a quote in the quote, in other words, the drafters' first solution to the inevitable conflict between elected assemblies was to appoint senators. This ensured that a government enjoying the confidence of the House of Commons would normally be able to have its laws passed by Parliament, whilst empowering the Senate to act as a check in those rare instances where it was absolutely necessary, end quote.
Comme je l'ai dit, en 2024, dans notre démocratie,
people to decide who should be the unelected people and how these unelected people are selected and what power they can enjoy. For me, the issue of who can vote at federal election belongs squarely and solely with the House of Commons. It is up to the elected ones to initiate this important reform about the voting age. In earlier debates on this bill, to support the opposite view, Senator McPhedran told us that nothing in the parliamentary rules, conventions, or precedents prevent us from introducing a bill on this topic. The reference to the Supreme Court seems to be more nuanced and probably not supportive of that kind of bill. She stated that in the Senate, 15 bills were introduced that were attempting to amend the Canada Election Act in the past 20 years. She noted that one of those bills received royal assent, only one. I have recently looked into these bills. Yes, since 2004, there has been 15 bills introduced in the Senate that proposed to amend the Canada Elections Act, not counting the one which we have before us today. Of these 15 bills, 4 were government bills and 11 were senators' bills. Of the 4 government bills, only one made it to royal assent. This bill was introduced during the pandemic to allow judges to decide, to justice of the peace, to issue judicial warrant remotely by the use of internet. For that purpose, the Election Act was amended to say that this warrant could be obtained electronically. So that was the sole amendment to the Election Act that was done by this chamber. It was to authorize a judge to issue a judicial warrant pursuant to the Canada Election Act. Nothing very substantive about who should vote. Of the 13 remaining bills, 3 are previous iteration of the bill before us. All were sponsored by Senator McPhedran, for which I must recognize the dedication. Of the remaining 8 bills, 3 were duplicates of each other, and they were on pre-election expenses. And at least one was proposing to amend the legislations, not in relations to elections, but to amend an annex that was referring to the Election Act in the National Capital Act. Not really something very substantial about elections. Thus, it cannot be said that senators have attempted over the past substantive amendments to the Canada Elections Act, and even so, none made it to third reading. As Senator Thanos pointed out in the debates on Bill S-221, the track record of voting age expansion bills introduced in the House of Commons does not provide much hope for the passage of the bill before us. The House has introduced such legislation 9 times through both introductions and restatements. In all of those attempts, the bill only once made it to the second reading in the last Parliament under Bill C-210 and was handily defeated at second reading by a vote of 77 in favor and 246 against. That was in 2022, not 20 years ago. The House of Commons has not resurrected this bill since then. The results of the vote at second reading for Bill C-210 are evidence of a general, liberal and conservative objection to the scope and principle of the bill before us, while most support for the bill came from the unanimous vote of the Bloc, the NDP, and the Green Party. While the NDP and the Green Party support for expanding the voting age to 16, they have not recently present bills in the other place to change the situation. Speaking to even the NDP has not introduced such a bill. Speaking of the NDP, I will quote Senator Ouzakos, who spoke in November about this bill, and he said, I quote, "Then, 10 years later, in 2018, during the study of Bill C-76, which aimed to comprehensively reform the Canada Elections Act, NDP MP Danielle Blakey criticized the government's choice to assign to the Senate, rather than the House of Commons, the responsibility for making certain amendments to the bill. He then reminded the House of Commons, I quote, "Why is it that we have to depend on an undemocratic House to get changes to our democratic instruments here in Canada?" Question mark. End of quote. Furthermore, I want to point out that there is no data referred to by the sponsor of the bill or all those that supported in support showing that there is compelling support for that measure in Canada. The only data referred to previously in previous speeches was by Senator McPhedran, and she referred to opinion polls conducted in England where some amendments were done, including in Scotland. She said, and I quote, "Opinion polling done in the UK suggested the public is unsupportive. In June 2024, polling showed that 47% of the public is opposed to lowering the voting age, whereas 28% support it. Only 10% of those over the age of 75 supported the change, but 49% of those aged 18 to 26 supported it." She quoted another poll. A poll of 500 16 to 17 years old showed young people were split. The poll found that 49% didn't think the voting age should be lowered to 16, while 51% said that it should. Polling in Scotland before the change of voting age for devolved the elections showed 2/3 opposed the vote at 16. End of quote. We don't have data about Canada, as I said, but certainly I don't see compelling reasons to pass that bill and to hear things that the House of Commons is deaf to. In such a context, I invite all of us to show restraint and to remain committed to our role as a complementary chamber and not as a rival of the House of Commons for issues rejected by the elected members. Accordingly, I will vote no to this bill at second reading, not because I'm opposed to the good intent of Senator McPhedran, but because I think it's important to define our role and our functions. And this is not only for that bill, but for all bills that are coming to this chamber from the government, or bills that we are introducing sometime to substitute ourselves to the elected officials. Thank you very much. Thank you for attention.
Senator McCallum, you have a question? There's not a lot of time left, so it has to be short, or we'll have to ask for more time. Senator McCallum?
Thank you. Will Senator Dalphond take the question?
Yes, Senator McCallum.
Okay.
Senator Dalphond, est-ce que vous allez...
Senator Dalphond, will you need to request more time? Will you accept that your colleagues grant you more time? I'm ready to accept.
Leave granted. Senator McCallum?
Okay. Senator Dalphond, I entered that information so this chamber would get all sides of the argument. I wasn't prepared to hide one side, but you do know that the country did go ahead and lower the voting age.
Senator Dalphond?
Yes, I said that it was in your speech in support of the bill. You referred to these data. And my point is to say that we don't even have the similar data for Canada. But if I look at data, I can hardly say that it's a compelling reasons to go at 16 or 17. And I will go further. If the House was proposing tomorrow that the voting age at 17, will we amend the bill to say it should be 16?
Senator Daskal?
Is there time for a question?
Senator Dalphond, vous acceptez une autre question?
Senator Dalphond, will you accept another question? Of course.
Senator Dalphond, would you agree that in a democracy, many institutions should play a role in maintaining and strengthening the democracy that we have? For example, the independent media, the courts, civil society, the House of Commons, and the Senate. Wouldn't you agree that we all have a significant role to play in strengthening and maintaining our democracy? Thank you.
Senator Dalphond.
Thank you very much. It's an excellent question. And I know you sponsored that bill about gender and candidates at elections, and you wanted to amend the Canada Election Act accordingly. I certainly believe this chamber has a role to play to review legislations, including Election Act amendments that are done by the House of Commons in deciding about who should vote or not, who should contribute to political campaign, and what kind of limits we may have, etc. I also believe that the Senate could have, as suggested by my colleague Senator Carignan, a study on that issue and make a report that would be available to all Canadians, including members of the House of Commons, that could decide to act upon this report. But instead of trying here to have this debate and have issue and evidence adduced before the Senate and then made part of a report, we're trying to force the issue by amending the Canada Election Act. And this is going across the line that we should not cross. And that's where I say I don't think this is our role, and I don't think that we are making a service to ourselves when we cross the line. We crossed the line previously in some other bills. We had debated in this place. And if we cross the line too often, we're going to make the point that maybe we don't understand our role, and there are ways to make sure that we should better understand our role, or we, Canadians maybe should reconsider having a Senate.
Senator Daskal?
Will the Senator take another question?
Yes.
Thank you. So I have observed, being in the Senate, that senators don't necessarily, and in fact they don't at all, defer to the House when it comes to matters of the Elections Act. And I take the 15 bills that Senator McPhedran has noted. To me, that is evidence that we don't defer to them. That is an extraordinary number of bills that we have taken on and that we have put forward here in the Senate. So I would say that senators are quite happy to be strongly involved. And let me give another example and ask if you recall, as I do, when we both came into the Senate the very same day, Senator Dalphond, we were sworn in together. And the very first bills that you and I worked on was the Elections Act in 2018. I recall incredible enthusiasm on the part of senators to engage in that bill. I recall no reluctance whatsoever to pull back and say, you know, we can't do this or we can't do that. And I also recall amendments put forward, in fact, by Senator Frum, a conservative, who put forward amendments to the elections bill. I offer this as evidence that we in this chamber want to participate and don't believe that we have to step back when it comes to dealing with these kinds of issues that are truly at the heart of our democracy. That bill in 2018 touched the heart of our electoral system because we were talking about eligibility to vote and many other...
Would you have a question, Senator Daskal?
agree.
3 secondes.
Bills, only one made it. It was a bill by the government. And all the other bills were...
Sénateur Dalphond, pour répondre à la question, vous aviez...
Senator Dalphond, are you done answering the question? Your time is up.